In Great Britain, E10 is cheaper than E5, but E5 has slightly more energy per litre and therefore you should be able to get slightly better fuel economy. The question is though, is it worth spending the extra filling up with E5? Well, probably not for most people most of the time, but things are rarely that simple. And if I do a half decent job in this video, by the end of it, hopefully you'll be in a better position to make your own decision as to whether or not it's worth the extra money. So what is E10 and what is E5? Well, E stands for ethanol and the number is the percentage of ethanol in that fuel. So E5 is petrol with up to 5% ethanol and E10 is petrol with up to 10% ethanol. The trouble with ethanol is it only has 2/3 the energy of petrol, but that doesn't mean that E10 has 2/3 the energy of E5 because only 10% of E10 is ethanol. When you work it out, E10 has 98.2% the energy of E5, or another way of looking at it, if you are running a car on E5 and it's getting 40 miles per gallon and then you were to switch to E10 but keep everything else exactly the same, in theory you'd be getting 39.3 miles per gallon. What does that mean for cost? Well, this is June 2024 and a litre of E5 is £1.53, which at 40 miles per gallon translates to 17.4 pence per mile. If you were to switch to E10, your fuel economy in theory would come down to 39.3 miles per gallon, but your fuel cost would come down as well to £1.45 per litre or 16.7 pence per mile. In other words, 2.9% cheaper for E10. However, even though ethanol has 2/3 the energy of petrol, it does have its own advantages. One is that it has a greater cooling effect on the engine, and Ford did an experiment where they tried to take advantage of this cooling effect and they set the engine up in a way where it actually run more efficiently, and overall they got better fuel economy on a fuel with a higher ethanol content. So the fuel had less energy, but they got better fuel economy. But just because your car says it accepts E10, that doesn't mean it's set up to take advantage of ethanol. It just means that E10 is not going to damage the fuel system or the engine. You may still get lower fuel economy, but in Great Britain, you're likely going to be saving money at the pumps, especially when you consider my next point. And that is, you don't know how much ethanol is in the fuel that you're buying. John from the YouTube channel Auto Shenanigans did a test where he took fuel from 3 major fuel suppliers in Great Britain. I'll leave a link to the video up there. This is in May 2023. And the E10 fuel from Esso had 2% ethanol. BP's had 5% and Shell had 6%. Now this isn't always going to be the same and it's going to vary at different times of the year and in different places. When you buy E5 petrol and pay the premium, you know you're not getting more than 5% ethanol. But that E10 pump that's sitting next to it, which is cheaper, may not have any more ethanol in it than the E5. In fact, it's possible that it may even have less. But if your car doesn't state that it can accept E10, do not put E10 fuel in your car. There may not be 10% ethanol in the E10, but there may be. You just don't know. And ethanol is more corrosive, so your fuel system needs to be set up to deal with E10. If not, well, you could end up with a very expensive repair bill. It won't necessarily happen straight away, but I wouldn't risk it. And also, just because your car may say it needs premium fuel, it doesn't mean it does. Because sometimes I see a fuel filler flap that says premium fuel and underneath it, it says E10 RON 95. So that RON is the octane rating and E10 is the ethanol content, as I've explained in this video. But that's standard fuel in Great Britain. That's not the premium fuel. I had a pupil once who thought she had to put the expensive fuel in her car. She didn't want to, but she thought she had to because it said premium on the flap, but underneath it said E10 RON 95. So I explained to her that is actually the standard fuel. I don't know why it says premium. In fact, here's an example, my own car. It says super unleaded on there, but underneath it says min 95 RON, which is the standard fuel in Great Britain. And that leads me on to this car. This is my car, I've owned it over 10 years now and I've done 210,000 miles in it. All those miles have been under my ownership. And I filled up with the cheapest fuel I possibly could, and I've tracked every fill up, and I've put 26,091 litres in it. Now I say I've tracked every fill up, there is a little bit of a gap there. I've tracked 210,017 miles out of the 210,198, so I've missed about 180 miles there somewhere along the line. And that 26,091 litres cost me £31,880. The fuel has definitely been the most expensive part of this car. The car was £20,000, I got £1,000 off, so it was a £19,000 purchase, but petrol so far, nearly £32,000. What if I would have put the more expensive fuel in? Now, before I got this car, or when I got this car, I didn't know if it would be a good decision to use the expensive fuel or a bad decision. I went with the cheaper fuel because my logic told me that was probably the better decision. And it turns out I was probably right, because if I put the premium fuel in, it would have cost me an extra £2,869 over this period, almost £3,000. And I haven't had any fuel related issues. It's on the original fuel filter. You cannot replace the fuel filter in this car. It's an integral part of the low pressure fuel pump. You have to replace the fuel pump to replace the filter. It's a lifetime part. So it may fail, but it hasn't failed yet. I called up Say It, the dealer, to see how much the injectors would cost, how much the high pressure fuel pump would cost. Injectors are £1,000 for all four. The high pressure fuel pump is £250. So even if I got a problem with one of those items, I'm still quids in. Would I have got better fuel economy? Well, before September 2021, it was E5 I was using anyway. After then, maybe I might be getting slightly better fuel economy, but as I've already explained, the extra fuel economy you get from E5 doesn't outweigh the extra cost. So in hindsight, it seems like I've made a good decision. I've saved money using the cheap fuel over 210,000 miles because I haven't had fuel related issues. Cheap fuel isn't less clean than premium fuel. Premium fuel claims to have a better cleaning effect on your engine, but it's not cleaner than the cheap fuel. If you've got crud in your fuel tank, it's probably not from your fuel. And when you look behind a fuel filler flap, I'm not surprised some people get crud in their fuel tank, because quite often behind the fuel filler flap it's just filled with crud and looks like mud sometimes. It looks like it's never been cleaned, and there's no surprise that when you take the fuel filler cap off, some dirt can get down the filler neck and into the tank. So cleaning around there will probably help. Your local £10 scratch and shine car wash probably doesn't clean behind the fuel filler flap. However, I do actually plan to take the injectors out to see what they look like after this many miles using standard fuel. Are they dirty? Do they still produce a good spray pattern, a good atomization of the fuel? The engine at the moment's running smoothly, it's responsive, and it produces good power. And when I plug into the computer, it tells me the injectors are within 0.05% of where they should be on the injector correction values. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be okay, but whether or not I was using the standard fuel or the premium fuel, it's not a bad idea after this many miles to check and clean the injectors. As I'm comparing E5 and E10 fuel, I should also mention Octane. When you buy E10 fuel in Great Britain, you're getting an Octane, or RON, of 95. Whereas when you buy E5 fuel, you're buying a more premium fuel, which comes with a higher Octane rating, either 97, 98, or 99. What does this mean though? Well, I can understand if someone looks at Octane and sees a higher number and assumes that has more energy in it. Higher octane, that sounds like more power. Octane, it's that word. It kind of sounds like butane or propane, but it doesn't mean energy. It's not how much energy is in the litre of fuel. The two fuels have the same energy. The difference is when a fuel has a higher octane number, it means the fuel is more stable. The fuel can take more punishment before spontaneously combusting. This is important when setting up an engine, because if the fuel is less volatile, you can set the engine up in a way which means it can run more efficiently and produce more power. But the difference between 95 octane fuel and 98 octane fuel, the difference in the way your engine can run, it's minor. We're talking about a tiny improvement in economy, and we're talking about 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, but probably 2% power increase. Not something most drivers are going to notice. You can measure it if you put the car on a rolling road designed to measure the power of the car, but it's unlikely you're going to feel it. If someone drained the fuel out of this car and put fuel in it, I wouldn't know if they put premium fuel in it or standard fuel. I have run the car on a couple of tanks of premium fuels just to find out what it was like a long time ago now, and I couldn't tell the difference. Also, petrol engines can only take advantage of a fuel with a higher octane rating if the engine has been set up to do so. If it hasn't, then it doesn't matter if you put 95 or 99 octane fuel in the car, it's going to run exactly the same, and your fuel economy and your power should also be exactly the same between the two fuels. Premium fuel usually claims that it can clean your engine better, but if your engine runs fine and is not known to suffer from carbon deposits, do you need the potential claimed better cleaning properties of the premium fuel? This car, for example, suffers from carbon buildup on the back of the intake valves, but the fuel doesn't go past those intake valves as the fuel is directly injected. If this engine was port injected and the fuel went past those intake valves, I'm sure those valves would stay clean regardless of whether or not I used standard fuel or premium fuel. However, if you have an engine which is known for suffering from carbon buildup in some part of the fuel system, usually the injectors, then trying a premium fuel with its claimed better cleaning properties may help. If you know about my other channel, then you may be aware that I take my car on track sometimes, not this one, my Mazda MX-5. I'll leave a link to a video up there, but even when I do that, I buy the standard fuel. And some people frown at me for doing that. I think, why would you do that? You're at full throttle often, you're going to notice that slight improvement in performance. But I just don't care. I don't notice the difference, therefore I'm not willing to spend more. For a track day, you're probably talking about £5 extra in fuel for the whole day to use premium fuel. But as I don't notice the improvement, I'm not willing to pay the extra. I'm just having fun. I'm not timing myself. If I was timing myself, yes, then I may notice a difference. Or if I was a race car driver and I was actually racing and there was something at stake and I wanted to win, then I would use the premium fuel because I would want every advantage I could have. But as it stands, I have an MX-5. I'm clearly not looking for the most powerful car on circuit. I would have a different car if that was the case. I used to have a more powerful car. It was faster in a straight line. It was faster around the corners, but I actually prefer the MX-5 just because I find it feels better, and I can do a lot more track days because it's so much cheaper on consumables. So actually overall, I have more fun. And I'll save that £4.50 on the premium fuel, get the standard fuel and buy a sandwich. Where I do recommend E5 fuel is if you don't drive your car very often and the fuel can start to get old in the tank, because ethanol absorbs water, and when it does this, it can separate from the fuel. And E5 and E10 both have these problems, but E10 has more ethanol, therefore it has a bigger problem. However, if you leave your car for years, it doesn't matter if it has E5 or E10 in it, you're still going to have this problem. You're going to want to drain the fuel and put fresh fuel in to reduce the risk of damaging your car or your engine and your fueling system when you try to start it. If you want to intentionally store your car for a long time, look into mothballing it to protect it over a long period of time. Don't just leave normal fuel in it. You can get storage fuel to help you with this. Quite often when someone leaves their car for a long time though, it's not intentional. They've parked it up in a garage and then forgotten about it. 20 years go by and they think, oh yeah, we still got that car. I wonder if it still starts. And then they end up on a barn find episode of the Late Break Show with Johnny Smith. I'll leave a link to one of his barn find videos up there. So why is it then ethanol is in fuel? Well, the idea is plants grow. That takes in CO2 from the atmosphere. The plants are turned to ethanol, burnt in a vehicle, and then that releases that CO2 back into the atmosphere. So it's a closed circle, it's renewable. People argue against this because they say farming the plants produces more CO2 than is saved, or the land could be used in better ways for the environment. I don't know if that's true or false. I'm sure it's different for different parts of the world and different situations. It's not going to be the same. But the idea behind putting ethanol into fuel is to reduce CO2 emissions. So should you pay extra for premium fuel? Well, if your car requires it, certainly. But if it doesn't, well, it's up to you. You've watched this video, you have your own knowledge and you have your own opinions. But bear this in mind. The placebo effect is very effective. Well, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're looking for car insurance, check out the links to Collingwood and Confused in the description. If you're learning to drive and want to insure yourself on somebody else's car, then Collingwood are there for you, because you can do so without affecting the owner's policy. And that takes away a big stress from the owner of that car. Via the link at the moment, it's up to 35% off and a £20 Amazon gift card. If you want to insure your own car, I recommend checking out the link to confused.com, because you fill out one quote form and get loads of quotes back from many insurers to compare who's cheapest. And you can change your car on that quote as many times as you like without having to do the whole quote. So it's a quick and easy way to do one quote, put a car in, calculate, put a different car in, recalculate, and compare how much it costs to insure different cars. Using the links doesn't cost you anything, but it does support the channel, so thank you very much. Subscribe to get my future videos, and until the next one, cheerio.